Hola. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And my name is Marisabel Torres. I run Mongabay Latam, a media outlet that covers environmental issues throughout Latin America. I'm very glad to be the moderator of this very interesting panel today. Today, we are going to talk about one of the issues that for many is the biggest story of our time, climate change, or better, climate crisis. This is a global crisis directly caused by us, or maybe better to say by our economic activities. Today, and that is why this is not only an environmental problem, it's a problem that crosses economic, political, and also problems about justice. And why justice? Because the climate crisis will affect and affects us all, but certainly not in the same way. What are the main causes? Well, science has told us that the fossil fuel industry is undoubtedly the main source of greenhouse emissions, but also another activities such as agriculture, deforestation, cattle, and other land use changes are important contributors. We have written a lot of stories about climate change, about climate crisis, vulnerabilities. So the big question is how to continue investigating these issues. For among of us, the big question also is if any of our stories will make a difference. Today, I woke up optimistic. That's probably because it's not raining, but also because we have three amazing journalists who have covered the causes of the climate crisis with different perspectives and methodologies and with greater impacts. They have followed pollution, they have followed the money, corruption, and supply chains. I'm going to introduce them. We have Gustavo Faleiros. He's the director of environmental investigations for the Butler Center, where he coordinates the Rainforest Investigation Network. Based in Sao Paulo, Brazil, he's an environmental journalist and media trainer specializing in data-driven journalism. In 2012, he launched Info Amazonia, a digital platform that uses satellite imagery and other publicly available data to report on the 9 Amazon rainforest countries. We have also Emilio Godoy. Emilio is a Mexico-based journalist who covers the environment, human rights, and sustainable development. In 2012, he won the Journalistic Prize on Green Economy and Sustainable Development. His reporting has revealed the dimension of pollution in Mexico, the damage created by the exploitation of fossil fuels, the development of fracking in the country, and the risks of nuclear energy. And finally, we have Elisângela Mendonça. Elisângela is an award-winning journalist specializing in climate breakdown and human rights. She's a fellow also at the Pulitzer Center Rainforest Investigation Network, a project designed to encourage collaborative investigative reporting, and a member of the Oxford Climate Journalism Network. Her writing has also appeared in Mongabay, The Intercept Brazil, and the Thomson Reuters Foundation. So we are going to start presenting cases, methodologies, and we're going to start with Gustavo.
Thank you, Marisol. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll talk without slides. We had an arrangement here that I will talk a little bit of kind of a more broad view about how to think about the causes. So it's going to be a bit of a reflection. But because I don't have slides, I will start with a little story that I think will help me to understand where I'm coming from. So I've been covering climate change and environment for 22 years now. And most of this coverage has been done in the Amazon region. Now rainforest in general, but most of my reporting was being in the Amazon region. And as Maria Isabel was saying, land use change is one of the main causes of emissions, as you know. Like I think it's still around 20-25% of global emissions of carbon are coming from deforestation, changes in vegetation, and also agricultural use of the land. So that's why covering the Amazon is also part of the climate change agenda. So in 2006, I was working for this outlet in Brazil. It's called OECO, which is an environmental news outlet. And I was tasked to do a story in a state called Acre, which is a small state in the Amazon. And there's it's an important state because from there there was a story of sustainable communities, rubber tappers, advocating for managing the forests. So there was this figure, maybe some of you know Chico Mendes, who was killed for defending the forest. And he created what is called extractive reserves, like where extractive in a good sense, where they can extract rubber and maintain the forest. So I was tasked to do a very difficult story, which is going to this reserve and showing how they were not managing forests. They were actually exchanging forests for cattle ranching, being corrupted by cattle ranchers to change the rubber tapper activity for deforestation. So it was tricky to go there. But I had this kind of a briefing for my editor, like, go there and show how these communities are being corrupted, you know, like they're cutting trees and not preserving the forest. So I went there, like a young reporter, and I was doing several visits to some of these areas. And one of the areas, I was very lucky because I got there with my fixer, so to speak. And the fixer asked, like, where's your father? Take this reporter from the city to see your father, you know? He's down there in the forest. And I run with the boy where this guy was. When I got to the place where his father was, it was something that I'd never seen before. It was like a room, like a place the size of this room, totally torn down. Like he has just burned the place. Imagine like a place like this, totally burned, and he was planting on the ashes like rice and beans. And when I asked him, like the first thing I shake his hand, and I felt his hand was really thick. My hand is not thick to this day, and I was like, wow. And he told me his age. He was 46. I'm 46 now, and he looked like 52 or even more, like 60. And I started thinking, like, maybe doing deforestation is not such an easy thing to do. It's not something that he wants to do. You know, like I got this perspective that he was not a bad guy. As a journalist, you all understand this. Like when you have this empathy for the villain, you know, like it's like this guy is not killing someone because he wants to kill, or if he was robbing someone because he wants to rob. I don't know. I had this insight that he was not a bad guy. And so that gave me this context of what we're discussing here. What's the cause of what this guy is doing? You know, like why he's cutting down forests. So I'm telling you this because what I think, and now I'm starting the reflection, that for getting to the bottom of the causes of climate change, we cannot talk about like our carbon emission and deforestation that was like an isolated phenomenon. We usually say in this work that I do with Elisângela in the Rainforest Investigations Network, that deforestation is kind of an illness. It's like you put the thermometer, you get the temperature of the earth or something, and you're just seeing the symptoms, but you're not seeing the causes. So deforestation is not the story in itself. You have to tell what is behind. And what I learned from that trip, and of course of 20 years of work, is that for doing this thing, you have to get, here's the hippie part of thing, tune with the cycles of the earth. What I want to mean with that guy, for example, they was cutting the trees in the dry season, right? Now we see like during the flood seasons, we have like these extreme events and everything. So getting into the cycles of the earth, for me, means that I am tuning my coverage to the dry season, to the drought season, to the extreme weather season, or to the heat wave season, not to what the public policy of that specific new thing that the politician said. It's related to climate change. So I'm kind of planning the coverage that I do according to the cycles of the earth. It means like I'm dealing, here's the other hippie part, with large scales of time and space. So I only can understand how that land and that person start doing deforestation if I look far behind. And I understand how that land has been changing over the years. So I have to have a very in-depth understanding of the territory and the history of the territory as a character. And the only way of this is looking at time. For example, a glacier who is changing over 40 years. I'm not talking about like just this small iceberg that is detaching from Antarctica in the last month. I'm talking about 40 years of a process of that glacier has been changing. So the challenge here is like how, as journalists, we tell these stories of 40 years that the territory has been changing. How I do like the before and after of something. Here's a tool, a tip. Satellite images are great for that, right? Allows me to deal with the large scales of time, and it's looking like I'm showing that 40 years ago this glacier was this size, now it's gone. I'm showing this land was full of forests, now is gone. So these are the kind of underlying causes of that kind of a human phenomenon that is happening in front of you. So by mixing these scales of time, of you being on the ground and looking at a phenomenon that is happening right there with tools and historical data, allow you to tell these causes. So I'm looking at the anomaly. This drought is one event in 1 million. So I'm always looking for a large scale of time to place that specific event that I'm reporting on in a bigger context. I'm pretty sure you all know about this. But talking about the scales of time and space and knowing the territory, here's another thing that comes to mind. Working with indigenous knowledge. I'm being very hippie today, but it's true. You know, like nobody knows territories as well as communities. And indigenous knowledge, in a sense that it can be anyone, not indigenous peoples per se, but people who understands the territory better than anyone. They know how the river was, how the river is now. They know how the forest was and how the forest is now. So by tapping into this knowledge of people who knows the territory, we are able to get at some of these causes. When in 2012, we created this website that's called Info Amazonia. One of the ideas is to work with collections. You know, like not only network, if I have time, I will talk more about the network, but I'll finish in time. But we started with this network of journalists of the 9 countries of the Amazon. Again, with the idea that we're dealing with large scales of space as well. You cannot tell the story of deforestation by only talking about Brazil. You have to talk about the whole basin. When I was talking about like tuning with the cycles of Earth, I'm doing a coverage that is not about like the New York Times, or the Chicago Tribune, or like the São Paulo, the Folha de São Paulo, talking about the Amazon basin, talking about the Info Congo, talking about the Info Amazonia. We have 3 websites: Info Congo, Info Nile, Info Amazonia. All of them with a transnational approach. So the geographical scope is the basin. And with that, you do collections of stories and data. I collect data of all these basins. I collect stories over time of several journalists and combine them, because to understand the causes, I need a large scale of time, large scale of space, and you can only do this with collaboration, with many journalists, a network of journalists working together over time. Getting to the end of this, what we're doing now with Elisângela, Fernanda, many of the journalists are here. We're creating a network of journalists in the Congo Basin, Southeast Asia, and the Amazon to cover rainforest, the Rainforest Investigations Network project hosted by the Pulitzer Center. And the idea is this: to understand the causes of what are destroying the forest now, you cannot only look at one of these places, you have to look at the entire work, because Vale mining company, working in the 3 regions. Imagine, Brazilian mining company is the biggest nickel mining company in Indonesia. Surprising, right? The biggest beef supplier of the world comes from Brazil, JBS. So we have to look at the supply chains as a network of the entire world. So really to finalize, what I see as a way of doing an investigation about causes of climate change is having these 3 pillars of things. Really rigorous data analysis, documents, data, geospatial analysis, understanding the territory, very good and constant field reporting, people on the ground, working with indigenous peoples on the ground, and finally collaboration, working as a network to cover big spaces, big territories.
Thank you, Gustavo, and you are totally correct. Sometimes I feel that in this global discussion, there's a disconnect between all these global topics, these technical terms, and what is happening in the territory, why people is doing what they are doing, what are the main vulnerabilities of the people that is going to be affected by the climate crisis, and that is basic and key addressing these topics. So I'm going to go with Elisângela Mendonça. She will tell us about an impressive investigation that found out that tens of thousands of cattle raised on farms damaging tropical forests were connected to international collagen supply chains.
Hi, thank you so much. Yeah, I have some slides. Maybe that will help. I'm not sure I'll be able to show you them all. I don't think we'll have time. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here today. Next please. So as Maria Isabel said, I'm a fellow with the Pulitzer Center's the Rainforest Investigations Network, but I'm also an environment reporter with the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. We are a newsroom based in London, focused on public interest, and we are very impact-driven. So we try and shed light on stories that are often either overlooked or are important, but regular, newsrooms, they don't have space or resources to work on. So you can call me Lily, it's fine. I'm the one with the red t-shirt in the picture. Next, please. So this investigation specifically, it was quite interesting because it was the first time ever that we mapped a supply chain, the collagen supply chain. So the beef industry's impact to the environment, something that has been well documented. But nobody has ever looked into collagen. So we decided to, thank you so much. We decided to look into this, and when I came up with this story with my team, I was telling a friend, oh, we're working on the story that involves Jennifer Aniston, and that was her reaction, just cursing me because I was ruining a celebrity. So better than just talking too much about that, I think I want to show this video, which my brilliant team put together alongside a strategy, a 5-day strategy to deliver a story in a format that would be engaging and interesting and would reach audiences that usually don't read our stories. Not even my family reads my stories. So I think that is a way to engage and reach people that we don't usually reach. So I think you have to choose to,
Best-selling collagen brand, Vital
so this is a Nestle-owned brand, Vital Proteins. Jennifer Aniston is the brand ambassador. And so we hired an actress and we filmed this video to try and, make it look like an influencer type of video. So people would relate to that. Maybe let's just play.
collagen, collagen, collagen. The wonder product for skin, joints, and muscles. It might be good for your health, but what about the health of the planet? Like others, best-selling collagen brand Vital Protein sources grass-fed, pasture-raised bovine hide from Brazil. That means cow skins, by the way. Cows that eat grass. Their chief creative officer swears by it. But grass-fed doesn't mean sustainable, especially when talking about Brazil. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism dug into this murky industry and found vast deforestation and invasion of indigenous lands. Here comes the complex bit. Concentrate. Across Brazil, many indigenous people live in tropical forests and preserve these lush environments. But their land is under threat from farmers invading to deforest and raise cattle. Cows that eat grass. These cows get mixed up with ones from legit farms and sold to nearby abattoirs, many of which are owned by Brazil's biggest and controversial beef companies, JBS, Marfrig, and Minerva. Dead cow skins go to tanneries to de-hair and de-flesh, and then to collagen companies to turn into scoopable powder. But isn't it just a byproduct, you say? No, it's a big part of meat companies' income. So while being healthy is vital, so is the health of the planet.
Obliged to report on? Sorry, maybe too sincere. All right. I think there's a. Is it okay? It's not working. Oh, I have to do something to go back to the presentation. All right. So I'll just talk a little bit about how we did it, because this was a very complex one, and it took my team 10 months to put this together, and this was a cross-border investigation, and we partnered with a brilliant reporter from Brazil, Fabio, and Andrew, my colleague in London as well. So this investigation was a pretty complex one, especially because we didn't know anything at all about the collagen supply chain. So it required a lot of research, data analysis, some sweat and tears to make sure that was working. I have to find somewhere. Maybe to go.
The next, please.
Next, please. Yeah, so I would not bore you with the details, but I'm available if you guys want to chat about, specific methodologies and techniques. But we were already working on a story about Nestle, and this came up, this is a follow-up, so this came up in shipping records. Basically, we identified a lot of collagen being shipped out of Brazil by Nestle, so we wanted to understand what was going on there. So we did a lot of data scraping. I relied on leaked documents to make cattle transport records, and then we cross-referenced all this data, the deforestation data with the territories, the indigenous territories. We also had some help with a partner, the Center for Climate and Crisis Analysis, CCCA. They helped us to understand the size of the destruction that we were talking about that was linked to this specific supply chain. So a lot of satellite imagery and multiple interviews with everyone that could possibly help us understand what was going on there. Bless you. Next, please. Yeah, I apologize for the puns, but I cannot help. So we needed to beef up our evidence, and we were working on trying to understand what the companies were, what are the companies that are involved in this. So we knew the Bureau has a lot of experience in mapping the supply chains of beef and soy, but collagen was new, so we needed to understand what are the main actors. And of course, the main actors are the beef companies, of course, but also several other players. It's a very complex supply chain. It's multi-layered, and there's several middlemen involved. So from a farm level to reach consumers in the global north, it takes a long way to get there. So after we did that, we decided that it was time to go on the ground, because we really needed to confirm that the links that we have found between the companies and with all the impacts and destruction were actually true. We care a lot about fact checking and accuracy. So we needed to go on the ground to confirm all this, and also understand a little bit more what are the actual impacts to local communities, indigenous communities, how people on the ground are being affected by this. So we went to 3 reporting trips in Brazil, in different parts of Brazil, where we were not slacking. It was just because it's very complex and we needed to go to different places. And what we saw was very different from, all the fancy beauty wellness industry that has celebrities and influencers saying that collagen is a miracle cure for your health, skins, and muscles. So we saw a very grim scenario and disgusting smell of rotting carcasses, with trucks just shipping these carcasses to the facilities. So it really hit me, because it was a stark contrast between these two worlds. So we wanted to expose that as well. So as you guys saw, the video that we put together is an explainer that was designed to look like an influencer video, but we also try to, deliver it in different ways. So it was picked up by many people around the world, many important news outlets around the world. We had a very nice social media strategy, and it really worked out really well. So our team is really proud of that. So the impact, for the first time, we are putting another ingredient, another product on the deforestation map. So we were the first ones to look into that, so that's great. There was a lot of pressure by the customers of Nestle to do something about that, so that was good. Nestle dropped one of the suppliers, and but most importantly, we had access to a letter that Nestle sent to one of the customers saying that they would end sourcing from the Amazon region effective immediately. So that's great. But I just want to say that I don't do this by myself. We have a very brilliant team. We're an amazing team that works together to put this together. I mean, I'm here today just representing them, but I'm just another person working in this brilliant team, and collaboration is the way to go, even internally or externally. So our module is collaborative. It's open. If you guys want to collaborate with us, just come on board. Let's do this together so we can move forward and reach further and go to different places, map other supply chains, and have fun with that.
Thank you, Elisângela. And now it's time for Emilio Godoy. As we know, the impacts of the oil industry are not only the greenhouse gas emission, but also the environmental liabilities that have affected thousands of local communities, and also the role of the government in trying to oversight this industry. So, Emilio, please.
Thank you, Marisabel. Honored to be here with highly Aymar colleagues from some time. And when I plan these articles, I've got kind of general questions, and there are like who does what or doesn't do, how they do it, where, and one that seems an obvious question, why. Usually it involves money and power. And you have to know that Mexico is a very pro-fossil fuels government, especially this one. It's pushing all the weight behind the national oil company, Pemex, and the energy transition is stuck, basically. So I've been following the gas issue for some time, and can you open the first link, please? For this article on methane, a source was telling me things and handing me documents, and I parted from thinking how the public policy was being applied by the regulatory body. And Mexico took 2 years to build the regulations. They went to Norway, Australia, or places to design them. It was an agreement by the North American leaders in 2016, and it was supposed to be effective in 2018. And there was a kind of lapse for adapting for the companies. But when with the new government and the pandemic, they decided that they will prolong this entrance until 19 months. And the excuse was the pandemic. And I wonder why it was 19, why wasn't, I don't know, 15 or 21, why 19? And so I did some freedom of information requests about programs, the volumes delivered by the companies, including Pemex, fines, and so on. And I got the answers. And so I proved the hypothesis that Mexico wasn't applying well the regulation, and there was a lack of complying, especially in benefit of Pemex, because as the government is pushing Pemex ahead, basically the state bodies won't put any obstacles for the company to succeed. Regulatory fines and so on. So all the policies are behind fossil fuels, and in follow up, the next link, please. And the follow up was, well, what's going on with the leaks in the pipelines? Mexico has a huge pipeline infrastructure. The gas comes from the US. It's extracted with hydraulic fracking, and so other communities are paying the price, so Mexico can have accessible gas. And so my question was, okay, what's happening again with the legislation, with the regulations, and what's happening with the leaks? Who is responsible for them? Is the regulatory agency being aware of them? What's going on with that? And I went to one of the states in Mexico, in the eastern part, Veracruz. I saw the leaks. Gas has no odor, color, or whatsoever, but when it comes to leaks, you can smell it. It's like rotten egg, something like that. and so I saw the leaks. I was in front of pipes sending methane basically to the atmosphere, and with local help, that's very important to have local partners. I went with a guy who guided me through part of all this network, and we went to 3 or 4 oil and gas wells, and we proved that there were leaks, and basically the regulatory agency just ignored them. And I have some database about the volumes, and one interesting aspect is that Pemex isn't there. So I wonder why the regulatory agency is ignoring Pemex, and this proves again this point of the state pushing behind the national companies in Mexico. And at the beginning, I thought about these kind of investigative questions. What are the questions that are going to lead what I want to find? And this has to do with budgets, for instance, how much money does the national company have, the budget of the regulatory agency, and the kind of policies they apply. And an interesting thing, and this is an ongoing issue I'm following up, the agency hides where the leaks take place. And its argument is that it's a national security matter, which has served as kind of huge umbrella to hide many things in many areas, not just energy issues or environmental issues. It's a common argument. No, we can't give that information because of national security. And well, you know, crime has been involved in fuels and gas piping. They break into the infrastructure and they steal fuels and gas to resell it in the market. So, and in Eastern Mexico, it's a huge problem. So perhaps it has some kind of logic, but in the end, it's just a pretext to hide information. I have to remind you that now Mexico is not a very friend of transparency and accountability. Databases are old, and so we have to struggle to find information. And the public requests about this are an example of it. Simply, the government doesn't want the people know about some very worrisome things, because finally it's our money. The government is spending our money in fossil fuel industry and then feeding the climate crisis. And very quickly, the next website, please.
1 minute, Emilio.
So quickly, this has to do with maritime pollution coming again from fossil fuels, and this is kind of different part of the investigations because it focused on public policies, what kind of policies is applied in Mexico regarding this issue, and its voluntary commitments towards international bodies like the International Maritime Organization, which has some long-term goals for reducing sulfur and other pollutants. And I did like 30 public information requests to many bodies involved in the issue. And again, the hypothesis was confirmed. Mexico doesn't have sound policies and is basically ignoring the issue. And in recent days, the regulatory body approved for Pemex to continue refining high sulfur fuels, including maritime ones. So it means that Mexico in no way will comply with its own voluntary goals. I went to Veracruz, one of the most important ports in the country, and it's supposedly to to control this pollution, and but basically it's not. And this has a very interesting edge because I managed to agree with a Spanish company through a contact of mine, and we agreed on that they would give me satellite images of contamination incidents throughout Mexico's territory, including the maritime zone, exclusive maritime zone. I would agree with giving credit to them and their analysis about these images. So this was a very effective alliance, and it serves a journalist to work with a scientist or a specialist to get information to prove our points. So I will go deeper into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Emilio. We have seen different responsibles in these stories. Gustavo, you have said we have to look through these causes to the responsible in your experience, not only in these stories, but in general. Who are the biggest responsibles behind these causes? Is the government? Is the private sector? Are the consumers?
I think that really depends on what we are talking about. I think among the cases that we've been looking, you saw the story that Lily was working is really close to my own experience. We have, as I was saying, like history of several factors where the government was really key, because a lot of this land use change emissions are caused by occupation of the land, and who regulates the occupation of the land is the government. Specifically in the Amazon, not only Brazil, but in several of the countries of the Amazon, if not all, there was a policy of colonization. It means that up to this point, there was this view that we needed to occupy the land for production or for security reasons. So specifically about Brazil in the 70s, you have the military dictatorship sending colonos, right, like colonizers, to open new land in the borders, and that helped to create a structural problem of like the occupation of the land that is leaning towards destruction, because you have to cut down the trees to produce, and there were incentives. So we talked about in a previous on the pre-conference that we have about climate change, about subsidies for the fossil fuels, but there was a lot of subsidies in several industries, and that's true for the food industry, that's true for the biofuel industry. Many of these supply chains that we are part of, or the palm oil, if there's any Indonesian friends here, they certainly know this story, that, like the governments have done a lot of like no tax policy for opening new land, and has happened recently in Peru as well. So I would start saying our traditional suspects, the government, are a big part of the problem. But then we are living in a moment that corporations are really strong and causing the problems, and I'm going to pass it on to Lily.
Nice save. I agree 100%. I would just add that, the work that I've been developing with the Bureau is very focused on food and food production. So I agree that the companies are really important. And in terms of emissions, food production is a major driver of the climate crisis, and it's often overlooked when we think about, the climate crisis. Usually we think about fossil fuels, and the foods that we eat is definitely driving this. And in terms of scrutiny, food companies, they are not being scrutinized enough. We are still miles away from scrutinizing them properly if we compare them to, the fossil fuels industry and things like that. So that would be something that I would love to see more. Food companies being properly scrutinized by journalists like us. I just want to add that the financiers of all this, they are not being, scrutinized either, not properly. We have very powerful banks, we have pension funds, we have all these mechanisms, all these, powerful people just funding destruction somewhere else in the world. And we're not definitely doing enough to cover these issues.
Yeah, I agree. The financial part is key. And so in Mexico's case, essentially the government is a major culprit because it's giving lots of money to Pemex. Basically, it's born in money. And for instance, Mexico is subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, and Mexico committed itself to cut that subsidies in 2016 at the G20 meeting. 7 years later, there is no progress at all. And at the same time, it's not taking charge of the climate effects. There is pollution almost everywhere in Mexico due to the impacts of the fossil industry, Pemex basically. And remember that Pemex is among the 10 most historical polluters in the world. And that means a lot. And in terms of paying the effects, it's again among 8 or 10 companies. It will pay like $3.5 billion for the damages in the recent calculus that was made. And this means pollution, and this means emissions. And talking about finance today, there is a peace of mind about how international private banks are financing Pemex with lots of money, like, I don't know, $70 billion in the last 7 or 8 years. So it's a huge business for international banks. Keep financing Pemex, even though it's the most indebted oil company in the world, like $100 billion, which is a huge burden, not only for the company itself, but for the country, because the government is helping to pay that debt, and it means money from us going into the fuel industry, and there is no accountability about that. I wonder which judge in Mexico would face directly Pemex, taking into account that behind Pemex is the president of Mexico. Which judge would face that? There are no political conditions to that, lamentably. And in the meantime, there are communities paying the price for it. There's a new refinery being built. They're pushing a lot of fossil fuels, and communities are putting their body behind it, and they're suffering the consequences, and we have to tell that story.
Thank you, Emilio. Now I would like that you share tools and methodologies that can help other journalists to cover these issues. As I have said, we have written a lot about these topics, and usually we're trying to look for new perspective, new approaches, new collaborative work, what have worked, also what haven't worked for you.
Yeah, tools specifically. For the collagen story that I mentioned earlier, we used 25 different sources of information. I wrote a blog post for the Pulitzer Center's website giving a lot of details and, methodologies and things that we used. So it's all there with the links, and you guys can have a look. But I would say that in complex investigations like this, collaboration is key. So if you bring on board different people with different mindsets and different skill sets, that's gold, because you can just complement each other. And I think this is a brilliant model for journalism, because you can just have different newsrooms with different skill sets working together to achieve that goal. So, but I would say that rather than just having a fancy computer with powerful enough to run satellite imagery and data scraping and all that, that's important, but that's not everything. So sometimes all you need is like very old school journalism to find the story and to find the leads that you need. For the collagen investigation, usually we joke that a good reporter has good nose for news, right? So you can smell a good story. And that was definitely the case, because we identified the trucks that we should follow and the truck drivers that we should approach just by sensing the smell of the carcasses. So we were like, yeah, this is the right one. So let's talk to this driver. So it's just a combination of things, right? So if as much as you can do, if you can just combine the old school reporting that you guys do brilliantly with new fancy tools. I think that's sorry, I did not mention any specific tool, so this is a bit useless, but I think it's just a combination of things actually.
In my experience, freedom of information requests work a lot. Partially, it's not the absolute truth or the whole thing. If you get tips, it would help you about what's going on inside agencies or the type of regulations or decisions they're doing. Access to satellite images is a thing of today. Can we? Yeah, there is a list of websites that you can and resources that you can use. Perhaps we can open one, please. The third, for instance, the International Methane Emissions Observatory. The third one, and because now we've got international databases which we can use to compare what national governments are saying. The international, this one, for instance, is part of the UN Environmental Program, and it has launched a series of satellites to measure methane and other gases. And in Dubai next December, they will present the first results. It will be interesting to see what they will tell, if they name and shame countries or companies, let's say. And Reuters, for instance, has teamed up with European satellites to find images in Mexico regarding methane emissions. A colleague of mine did something like that too. And actually next week there is a workshop in Mexico for which I was invited about the use of satellites by EDF, the Environmental Defense Fund, which also is launching a web of satellites to identify methane leaks. NASA, the NASA, has also some satellites to that. So this thing is becoming more and more common, and somebody said that polluters won't have any place to hide, and I partially agree with that. I think satellites are a very good resource to find what's happening with pollution from many sources, landfills, the industry, the fossil fuel industry, for instance, and that's a good thing. So satellites, international databases. The World Bank has a very good one about gas flaring, for instance. It's a very serious problem. Do you remember these images of the ocean burning twice in the Gulf of Mexico? Well, that's an example of what's going on with gas flaring. And it happens because basically Pemex doesn't have the technology nor the money to catch the gas, the methane, and just launching it to the atmosphere or burning. When I was in eastern Mexico, I saw these lights, let's say, burning a lot of gas. Some of them the whole day. Imagine living like 100 meters from it. It's incredible. I've got some pictures of them, and it's really incredible that this is happening. And Mexico has committed itself to reduce 98 of methane emissions. But when I asked Pemex or the Secretary of Energy, or including the presidency, hey, give me your plan to do that. There's no plan. And which money? There's no money. They're expecting the US that comes in help. So there's no plan, there's no money to that. So how would this 98 reduction goal work?
Stop.
I as a map head, I can be a bit specific here about the things that we've been using. So whenever we're doing a story, because of this environment, this idea that an environmental story is telling a story of a place, we go have a geographical scope. We started by finding all the layers of information that relates to that place. again, like who are the owners of those lands, who are the concessions of mining of that place. So we get various layers of this, of the specific place that we are looking at, a specific indigenous territory, a specific protected area. Sometimes it's big as the whole Amazon, but you start like collecting layers of information to try to get to a specific farm, a specific name, a specific corporation. And when you get to this point, then we start looking for the documents. So when you get to this point of having the specific actors, what we usually use is like SciAdi, which is a paid tool for getting corporate networks, who are the owners of those companies, who they sell to, what are their exports, and try to get very specific things. We use Panjiva, that Lily mentioned, for getting the shipping bills, who's selling to who, and then any local corporate documents. So we have in our team a research editor, Djelter, who's there, and does like a lot of this like corporate research to help fellows. And then we have the data team, who does more like of the geospatial analysis, which is getting more of the satellite imageries and the geospatial data. So we get concessions from, for example, Global Forest Watch is a great tool for getting concessions about mining. Many open data portals are very good for getting concessions of timber concessions, palm oil concessions in Indonesia and Africa. And the satellite imageries, depending on the work that you're doing, the good news is that for journalists, satellite companies are very generous, because they know the journalists will use not a big amount and not for commercial purposes, so they tend to see journalists as a good vehicle for promoting their product. So you get Airbus imagery, which is amazing. You have to reach out to them and ask. But Planet, as you probably heard, is a great source. And Sentinel-2, it's a mid-resolution, 10-meter resolution satellite imagery provided by the European Space Agency in a platform that's called the EO browser, or EO browser, Earth Observation Browser. You can get several updates. In terms of like methods, what I was saying in the beginning is that I think it's very, as someone who likes this, it's very interesting to keep an eye on the pulse of the Earth. Like how the forest fires are behaving, how the rains are behaving, and you keep an eye on this, trying to find the story and try to find the right moment to go to the territory and do your story. And when you're going to the territory, final tip here, what I love to do is this is one of my favorite tools still, is using Google Earth Pro that you download on your desktop and plan for your field trip, because then you can kind of see where you go before, like from above, where you go, and you get a context of the territory you're visiting. And something that sounds like a gimmick, but is really, really nice, is to use a GPS when you're on the ground and tracking everything that you do on the ground, like getting all your routes, getting all your pictures with the coordinates, everything that you do, you're tracking yourself, like a big of the spies that we were hearing yesterday. But the reason for doing this is that, like Emilio was doing, like he saw the flarings, geolocate. You saw the deforestation, geolocate. You geolocate everything that you see on the ground, because when you get back to the office, you go on Google Earth again, or any other, but Google Earth is good, and you extract these coordinates, and then you can really zoom out and understand what was surrounding you. Because there's like, oh, this deforestation in comparison to other deforestation was big enough, or not as big as I was thinking. Or this flaring is 1 among 100, or this flaring is close to a community. So you get the territorial context through these coordinates. So I really recommend, whenever you go, there's like apps, GPS for your phones, or a GPS itself is good because it doesn't consume a lot of battery. So I'll recommend using GPS when doing field trip.
Thank you, Gustavo. Now I would like to address difficulties and risks. Both Elisângela and Gustavo are coming from Brazil. That's a territory that's in a lot of problems recently related to deforestation. Bolsonaro was a big problem, but also the presence of illegal economies, illegal logging, illegal mining, other activities that also affected what is happening in the territory. And Mexico, the same. I don't have. I probably Emilio will give more details, but I would like to know these difficulties and risk that you have faced as journalists, but also the sources that we are interviewing and putting in our pieces. Emilio, you would like to begin?
Yeah, quickly. Before every trip, I do kind of risk evaluation. What are the local risks, the local situation? What incidents have happened in the last 3 months? What are the local stakeholders, NGOs or academics or other colleagues? And for instance, Veracruz is historically the state where most journalists are killed, and its governor is no friend of the press whatsoever. And usually I'm very discreet about the trips. I don't tell anybody or tweet where I am or what I'm doing. I don't do that for security reasons. And in these cases, well, that was one situation. Fortunately, I had no problems, and local people helped me. That was very helpful. But and one intriguing thing is that I tried to talk to a local authority, and he wanted to charge me for the interview because he told me, "Yeah, journalists come by and take things, and what do I win?" I partially understand his point, but journalists don't pay for information, basically. And so I look for somebody else, and I found. And technical difficulties, yes, as I explained before, the databases don't have locations, for instance. The information is partial, so you have to find ways to complete them. And in the maritime story, the Spanish company gave me the full analysis of the 4 images they gave me. And in one case, they identified the ship, but they told me you can't use it because it would mean legal troubles for us, because basically we're accusing the ship of polluting and we have to prove it. And I understand its point, and I replied, well, but if it appeared in the official database, which I got through a freedom of information request, I will cite the ship. It wasn't, so it meant that the government didn't know about it, or just ignored it, or didn't monitor it. But what I did as a trick was through a tool of shipping finder, which is very useful. There are 2 or 3 of them. I tracked the ship, the change of hands, for instance, the owner, and where it was the last time it was spotted. It was like in Italy or something like that. And so I could use that information without citing the name of the ship, and so I complied, let's say, with the agreement. And yeah, but basically those were the barrages to face.
Yeah, both Mexico and Brazil are some of the deadliest countries in the world for environmental defenders and journalists. So we definitely need to be very careful about what we do when we go on the ground. At the Bureau, we have now put in place a plan to always have a risk assessment that's very thorough, and it requires a lot of planning. So when we go on the ground, when we go on a reporting trip, we spend a long time studying what we're going to do and who we're going to talk to, identifying the risks, and making sure that we have a plan to mitigate them if we have risks. What we do is risky. There's no doubt that we're exposing ourselves to risk, but this is a long game. So I want to continue to be alive, please, so I can continue to publish stories. So it's important that all the risks are mapped and we know how to deal with them. Another cool thing that we have now is, well, thanks to the Pulitzer Center, since I became a fellow, the Pulitzer Center supported us journalists to be better prepared for any difficult situation. So I recently concluded a hostile environment and first aid training back in London that was really helpful and enlightening on how to deal with difficult situations and critical, complicated things. So that was really helpful. And also, every time I go now on a reporting trip, I carry with myself it's some sort of satellite phone, but it doesn't make calls. It's just for texting and for it's basically a tracker. So it's a Garmin device that now we have, and two of us, we have this tracker that basically just sends a signal every now and then, to the editor anywhere in the world using satellite signal, so they know where we are. So we have protocols for communication, so regular check-ins when you're on the ground. And if the check-in doesn't happen, the plan B is looking into the Garmin device, so the tracker, to see where we are. So that's very helpful. It's peace of mind for everyone, and also for us, especially considering last year we had a dear colleague of us, Don Phillips, that got murdered in the Amazon, and Bruno Pereira as well. So it's not naive that that it's good to be extra careful. We are not superheroes. We're just journalists doing our job, and we need to be alive to do that.
We'll open to questions, but I'll be really quick. I think about challenge the environment, in this case the ecosystem where we're walking around in the Amazon in general, for environmental stories, become much more hostile. It became much more hostile, and this is very similar to what we're facing in any political story, because I don't know, people just see journalists as part of a kind of a liberal conspiracy, and if you were going around asking questions why you're doing things like you're doing, like doing illegal mining or like burning for cattle raising, they will kick out of the property. Like it wasn't like that. I assure you. Like, you could go to a illegal mining site and just say, like, look, I'm a journalist, I'm not here to judge anyone, I just want to understand what you're doing here, and we're going to publish a story that will tell to the world why you're here. And that is not possible anymore, because people are saying, like, oh, you're leftist, or I don't know, they will kick you out. The other aspect of this, which is more complicated and specific to some places, what exactly happened with Don Phillips. And then there's direct hostility, which Mexico knows very well, that a lot of activities are controlled by organized crime.
Yeah.
Illegal mining, fishing, which was the cause of the killing of Don Phillips. Now we know that was a legal fisherman scheme that asked their collaborators to kill Bruno and Don, just because they were bothering with their business. Bruno specifically was making a lot of trouble for them. And you have to take care of this, because it's like the owner of that specific pump of water taking gold of the Amazon is not just like the guy of the big impresario of the city. It's a guy maybe in a like a big cartel in São Paulo and Rio. So that's what makes it much more hostile.
Yeah.